This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Hey, this is Brian Peña. I always join the Vito podcast, the best podcast in the United States.
And welcome to the latest, the freshest edition of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company. I'm your host, Vito Jerome Chirco, along to my usual sidekick and partner in crime, that is the Dr. Doc and Jack, John Charles Macaroon. John, how's it going?
Vito, you're looking at a man that's probably having the greatest week of all time. Knowing that Michigan State defeated Michigan this past Saturday in a monsoon, going to the WWE event, all the happenings around town, all the happenings with the podcast. I'm thrilled to be here today, and we did a little skit earlier before the podcast. I thought that was very funny, and I always enjoy, having you come to the office, and I'm looking forward to our conversation regarding the Detroit Tigers and looking at some other things as well in the world of baseball.
I think it was a little bit of an entertaining parody that we did right before we started recording this version of Tigers Talk, and you almost wish that this past season for the Tigers was a parody of a season for the Tigers, and it wasn't. It was true. They lost 98 games, but the good thing is they wrapped up the number one overall draft pick in next year's amateur draft through being so miserable all year long, and especially, as we all know, Doc, in the second half of this season. So good for the Tigers is that they have the number one overall pick, and now it's who they take, and we're not experts on the draft, but we keep hearing of this Florida starting pitcher, Brady Singer. Will they take him number one? It seems like he's a guy that people think the Tigers should take, despite their lack of positional players in the farm system that are really of high quality, Doc.
What do you think?
I think they should take him. If he's really a bona fide ace, the next up-and-coming ace and face of the Tigers' rotation, then take them despite the fact that really they could use top-tier position player prospects, couldn't they, at this point, with the lack of depth. When it comes to positional players in their farm system right now, it is lacking that. It is very barren in terms of positional players, and top-tier ones in the farm system for the Tigers as we speak, Doc.
So why do you think a lot of pitchers go number one? Is it because it is the number one position that general managers will look at in terms of like a quarterback that will jumpstart a team? When you said it yourself, there's obviously some needs at different positions that could help the Tigers maybe next season, but maybe for the long-term growth and to really kick off a rebuild, that if there is this number one prospect in terms of an arm, because just like a quarterback, it really does kind of mirror how challenging it is to play quarterback, how challenging it is to be a starting pitcher, because it's going to take you a couple years to develop, right? And the Tigers right now have a plethora of arms in the minor leagues, and people are excited to see the likes of Bo Burrows. They're excited to see Alex Faedo. Manning is in the loop. So I'm interested, why do you think that the starting position is that important in terms of the draft? Especially this pick, I think, is super important, wouldn't you say?
They can't ruin it, because they have wasted that number one overall pick and top draft picks in the past under another older regime that wasn't really competent, let's say, in making draft picks atop the Major League Baseball amateur draft year in, year out, when they were a miserable franchise and losing nearly 100 games per season in the early 2000s. But really, starting with the mid to late 1990s is when they started this funk of bad baseball in Motown, first at Tiger Stadium before it closed down in 1999. And when Comerica Park opened up in 2000, they were still a team, Doc, as a regular Major League ball club that wasn't equipped to win, and suffered through a lot of bad baseball, a lot of losing baseball from 2000 when Comerica Park opened up until 05. And they didn't get good until Jim Leyland came on board as the skipper, obviously. And we've talked about that ad nauseum. He was on Doc and Jock a while back, too. It was great to have him grace the airwaves for the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. And very deservingly, he was inducted into the Michigan Sports Hall of Fame for what he did with the Tigers from 06 to 2013. And prior to that, once again, Tigers had very little winning baseball and had to pick atop the draft. And Randy Smith, as part of that old regime, messed up those top draft picks almost every single year. And really, you probably could argue he messed it up every single year. So it is very vital now, in retrospect, for Al Avila to, bring this conversation full circle. It's vital for him not to waste this chance at getting a prized, golden arm for the franchise moving forward in Brady Singer, who I think they will take number one because of everybody saying they will take him right now. So unless he was to suffer a major setback, I could realistically see the Tigers taking Singer, even though they don't have that major need atop the rotation right now because of the presence of Michael Fulmer. But then the thing is, too, is that when you have a franchise pitcher you can select that can head your staff for the future, you go out and get that guy, no matter what your other needs are as a ball club, and no matter what other kind of strong rotation arms that you have in your rotation for now and the future. Because for now, the Tigers have an ace-caliber arm in Michael Fulmer, a guy that won the Rookie of the Year in 2016. But they have to look ahead and think about the fact that, well, what if Fulmer, deals with these injuries, right, in the future, too? And maybe isn't an ace-caliber arm in the future? And even if he is an ace-caliber arm, once again, in the near and long-term future for the Tigers, well, then you have two aces, perhaps, right at the top of your rotation, in Singer and Fulmer. And how about Vito? They drafted him, and then Franklin Perez, too, who they got in the Astros deal for Justin Verlander. You got Perez, you got Vito, you've got Matt Manning, as you mentioned, Doc, Bo Burrows maybe, you got Michael Fulmer, you got Matt Boyd maybe, Daniel Norris maybe, and then Brady Singer. Think about how many arms you have now for that rotation for the long-term future, perhaps. And then you can deal one or two of those guys, and guess what? Upgrade your lineup. So there's that mentality that even maybe having 6 or 7 rotation arms when you don't need that many, it's still better to have more arms than not enough arms.
Okay, Vito, I could co-sign that. I understand completely what you're talking about in terms of the starting pitching and how important it is. And I feel like, don't you get a sense that everybody wants to get into that advantageous position like the Braves with Glavine, Smoltz, Greg Maddux, unbelievable pitching staff that Atlanta put together for a period of time there, and it got them into the postseason well over a decade. Now, they didn't cash it in multiple times, but heck, they still won a World Series.
14 straight division titles, I believe they won in the NL East. They won in 95. And the thing is, though, the contrarian point of view to take, and you saying all of that, is that the Tigers kind of tried that. Didn't they try that strategy of having a great rotation, 1 through 5, at least 1 through 4? I mean, think about 2014. Remember who they had, right, in that rotation. They had Verlander, Price, Scherzer, all of those guys, your top dogs, all guys that have won Cy Young awards, too. I mean, think about that, how great that 1 through 3 was. And also a guy like Doug Fister. In 2013, what they've had great rotations. So with Verlander and Scherzer fronting the rotation for a long time there during that last great era of Tigers baseball. And then they had Rick Porcello, Doug Fister, Anibal Sanchez even. Sanchez coming out of the pen in 2014 against the Orioles, remember. So they've had an embarrassment of riches in terms of rotation talent, such as the Washington Nationals have right now, who are on the verge of getting eliminated by the Chicago Cubs. The Nats always underachieving, and they have a great rotation assembled, including Max Scherzer. Scherzer goes from the Tigers, who couldn't get it done in the postseason, to the Tigers of the National League, perhaps, you could argue. And they have Strasburg, too, and Gio Gonzalez, all these great arms assembled in that rotation, and they might not get past the first round, and they have faltered so many times in the postseason despite all that great rotation success like the Tigers had when the best they could do was get to a fall classic, well, in 2012, and get swept.
Okay, Vito, quick trivia. When was the one and only previous time that the Detroit Tigers held the number 1 pick?
Well, I'm going to say in the 2004 draft.
Nope, it was 1997 when they drafted a hard-throwing right-hander,
Matt Anderson,
out of Rice, named Matt Anderson.
Look at that. And, Matt Anderson was never that great. And that was the old regime once again, the regime we don't want to speak of, right? Randy Smith and company.
He did shine the next year, impressed with a 103-mile-an-hour fastball, but in 2002, tore a muscle in his shoulder and flamed out.
Never lived up to the bill, did he? Never was as good as advertised, and they wasted that pick. And that's why when you get the chance to draft as high as the Tigers, well, just, hey, number 1.
Do you know
how you can't waste the opportunity, Doc.
Do you know, according to urban legend, how he tore his shoulder?
No, what is the urban legend regarding Matt Anderson?
Okay, here from the Detroit News, it says, in 2002, He reports that he tore a muscle in his shoulder in a bullpen session, but urban legend has it that he was in an octopus throwing contest and did some damage.
Throwing octopi, huh?
That's the rumor. So it is one of those situations where, I don't know if a lot of people investigated it further, but he was telling a different story than what others have maybe kind of hinted at. Maybe he was doing some things off the field.
Yeah, that he should not have been doing, throwing octopi. And I guess octopi can get you in trouble, and Matt Anderson maybe got injured through that. There's always so many urban legends out there about these guys and what really happened and how they got hurt. How about Joel Zumaya, right? Now, fast forward, how many years? To 2006. And Zumaya, what really happened to him? Was he lifting too much? Was he playing Guitar Hero and got hurt through that? There are so many great urban legends out there. And if that's the case with Matt Anderson, too, that's a sad state of affairs and a sad way for a guy to end his career or become a bust, as he really was a bust. That's how you can define his career, because he never truly lived up to the bill of a number 1 draft pick, Doc.
Any other busts that you can think of, or anybody that was drafted, or anybody that you thought coming out was a player that had a strong potential and then just flamed out?
Drafted high by the Tigers, Kyle Sleeve. Do you remember him? Starting pitcher. They had a lot of guys before Verlander really was taken. Then they got Rick Porcello in the draft. So they had some good draft picks after the fact, but in the 90s and early 2000s, not many good draft picks, and a lot of those picks were made once again by the old regime and Randy Smith, and he wasted a lot of chances to build up the Tigers and get them better, and he never did that properly, and that's why he lost his job. Dave Dombrowski came in, got rid of him, and took over as team president and general manager for all those years, and made some smart draft picks then. So we got to give, Dombrowski once again a lot of credit and love, even though his Bo Sox have been now defeated in the playoffs for a second straight year in the first round too, Doc.
Now, before we start talking about potential managerial candidates for the Detroit Tigers, because at this point in time, Al Avila is interviewing candidates. The Arizona Diamondbacks have lost. They've been eliminated. And so potentially Gardenhire now, who is a staff member over there in Arizona, could now be interviewed and potentially be in line for an opportunity to be the manager of the Detroit Tigers. But in looking at history, in terms of those that have the number 1 pick, the overall WAR for the number 1 pick is 19.27. The overall WAR for the number 2 pick is 12.33, and the number 3 pick goes down, the WAR goes down, and it's 10.61. So what that number tells you, the wins above replacement, is that having the number 1 pick, if you make it properly, is going to potentially help your ball club. So with that said, in 2018, are you down with another season like we had, knowing that potentially they're going to play a bunch of young players? Shouldn't the goal for 2018 be the development of the talent, 1, and 2, securing the number 1 pick yet again?
But you know what? They got Verlander with the number 2 overall pick in 2004. Who went number 1 that year? A guy not many have heard of or had heard of until recently, because he's now a relief pitcher with the Texas Rangers, a hard-throwing reliever too, Matt Bush, who came up as a shortstop with the San Diego Padres. They took him number 1 instead of Verlander number 1 in the 2004 MLB amateur draft. So that number 1 pick can be a tough one to select, and one that teams get wrong from time to time, and more often than not, actually, as you kind of revealed with that little note about WAR and WAR produced by the number 1 pick. And the number 2 pick, you almost can guarantee a little bit more success with the number 2 pick at times, because, well, it's just the number 1 pick. Guess what? Even though it's 1 pick from each other, the number 1 pick and who that guy is always carries a lot of pressure with him as he goes along with his major league career, and will get noticed more as a bust if he does become that, as Matt Bush truly was for a long, long time there after being drafted by the Padres and then being converted from the position that they selected him at, which was shortstop, and was out of baseball and came back into baseball, now with the Rangers as a reliever, finally achieving success. So these guys being picked number 1, guess what? When you pick them number 1, doesn't guarantee success with these guys right off the bat or at all. And that is the sad truth or sad reality when it comes to the Major League Baseball amateur draft, and really all these drafts, right? In all professional sports leagues, Doc.
All right, managerial search, Al Avila, his task is to go out there, interview possible candidates, many people, and it's a tough situation because many people view it, and rightly so, they view it that the next manager probably won't be the guy that will be around when the actual winning starts to happen again. So what are the names that are out there? Anybody that has caught your attention? Fill me in. What's going on with the managerial search?
So right now, you're right. Ron Gardenhire is a candidate. He's the bench coach of the Arizona Diamondbacks. They were just eliminated from the postseason in the first round by their divisional rivals in the NL West, the LA Dodgers. Good to see the Dodgers advance to the NLCS after the great success that they had in the regular season, really up until the very end, and they had that losing streak and whatnot. But they were the better team. So there's a candidate there in Ron Gardenhire, a guy that I don't want to see the Tigers hire, though, by the way. Freddie Gonzalez keeps being talked about. Omar Vizquel, once again, keeps being talked about. Even Dave Clark was interviewed. McClendon seems like he is a candidate still. I don't think he'll get the job. I don't think Dave Clark even has a shot at getting the job. Freddie Gonzalez, I believe, does. I believe Omar Vizquel does. And I believe those two guys are the front runners right now, even though Phil Nevin, who played for the Tigers back in the day and for the Astros, was a minor league skipper for the Tigers at one point and was dismissed by the Tigers. He's a guy that could be a candidate, and he's been bantied about a little bit. But I don't think he'll get the job because of how he left the organization, not in the most positive fashion. I still think it comes down to Vizquel and actually Freddie Gonzalez at this point, even though I don't know if I love Gonzalez either being the guy tabbed to be the replacement for Brad Ausmus.
Okay, see, I find it interesting in that the names that are out there, there's a little bit of a mix between, guys with experience and young guys. And so for me, I'm looking at a situation where is a manager going to want to come in here that's already been a manager before and recognize that he's going to have a bunch of young talent. He's going to be in a situation where winning is not going to be expected for the next couple of years. Can a manager who's been established already, really be down with that? Because while a job is a job, when you actually get into it and you start losing 100 games a year, it gets frustrating because not only for the fact that it's just losing day in and day out for 2 years straight, but you got to answer questions regarding, okay, how are you using your lineup? How are these guys progressing? A lot of times, this guy that's going to be hired that's had experience before, he's going to be the scapegoat. He's going to be the guy that's going to be put in the crosshairs by the media, by the fans, and they're not going to want to see what we saw in September. I feel like, and the numbers kind of now bear it, and I'll share that with you, the fans don't want to see losing baseball. They want to see a little bit of competitiveness. And so I would say I think it's in the best interest of the Tigers potentially to get a young guy like an Omar Vizquel, let him kind of grow a little bit with the team, and maybe, just maybe, there is a spark there that you see in terms of getting the young manager that you thought you had in Brad Ausmus. So if it was me, I'm looking more along the lines of hiring a first-year guy at this point in time. Then when you look at a situation when it's 2-3 years down the line, maybe you've gotten a couple talented players, you've gotten a couple top 5 picks, then maybe if the losing is really bad and the culture's bad and it doesn't really turn around, then you go out there and you find the young, hot assistant or the previous, a manager out there. You got to find basically your Tito Francona. You got to go find him.
It's hard to do.
It's hard
to go and find him, especially when you have a lot of losing baseball coming up in the next 2 years at least. And you don't give a guy a fair shot to make it happen as a big league skipper because of that, Doc.
Do you see potentially, I know A.J. Hench was a guy that was fired before. Do you see a guy that's maybe in a situation that's not so advantageous, but maybe in 4 or 5 years with a little bit more talent can be developed?
Brad Ausmus. Going to the Mets. He's going to the Mets.
No.
Or he's going to the Yankees. You know what I would love to see really quick, and this is kind of half-heartedly being said by me, Joe Girardi being fired by the Yankees. They replace him with Brad Ausmus, and we get Joe Girardi. Because Girardi would be scooped up so quickly by another Major League Baseball team.
Okay. So you don't see a manager maybe like in Milwaukee, anybody with the Cubs or with the Red Sox, nobody, no name.
Bench coaches?
Yeah.
Like Dave Martinez from the Cubs. He's been the right-hand man of Joe Maddon for a long time in Chicagoland with the Tampa Bay Rays when Maddon was there. He's never gotten a shot. And I know actually Tony Paul, by the way, a guest of ours how many weeks ago now, he brought up his name, Dave Martinez's name, as a candidate for the Tigers, a guy that should be hired by somebody sooner than later, as he's never been given a shot to be a major league skipper, and he's been the right-hand man of one of the most successful managers in all of baseball the last decade now in Joe Maddon. So Martinez is the guy that I think could get a shot and probably should be in contention for the Tigers gig, even though, once again, the most important thing to consider with the Tigers gig and who gets it next is that they got to give this guy a fair shot. So if they lose 100 games the next 2 years, you can't just fire the guy, I think.
Maybe the Arizona Diamondbacks manager, maybe he gets tired of potentially being out there, having to compete against the Dodgers year in, year out. Maybe, the fan base gets sick of him in a couple of years, and now he's got experience being in the postseason if he can continue to rally that squad.
Well, speaking of a manager that a team got sick of, Terry Collins. with the Mets, who was a student, remember, learned under Jim Leland, and had some success with the Mets, went to the World Series once, remember, too. And I think he's a guy that should be a candidate, I believe is a candidate. And, how viable of a candidate is he truly? I'm not sure. I'm not an insider here. I'm not going to speculate and act like an insider now all of a sudden. But I think Collins has a chance because he did have some success with the Mets, with a bigger market club, and the Tigers aren't nearly that. But I think Collins proved that, and he did before too with the Anaheim Angels when they were just the Anaheim Angels, that he deserves a chance, Terry Collins, that is, to be a manager again. It's just he's not the biggest spring chicken out there. He's an older gentleman now, a guy that maybe doesn't want the job as a big league skipper anymore. And the Mets, since saying that he won't be the manager next year, have relegated him to front office duties, like to be a special assistant, and to Sandy Alderson, I believe. So he's going to help out in the front office for the time being, I guess. But that's kind of just, I think, a nice, a courteous thing to do to him, a nice gesture for him. And I don't know how much he really wants to do with that role. And maybe he wants to manage again. And if so, I think the Tigers will consider him as a candidate to replace Ausmus. And at least this guy has experience. But once again, I don't know what a guy with experience or without experience is going to do with this job, as the Tigers are currently structured to once again lose nearly 100 the next 2 years at least.
Torey Lovullo.
Yes, of the D-backs, yep.
Potentially could be a guy that's out there young. And I think there are some ties to the Tigers organization as well. So maybe a name to keep out there in your mindset regarding a future manager, maybe not the next guy. So if I were to put you on the spot, give me a name. Who's the next Tigers manager?
I think Freddie Gonzalez. I keep hearing about his name. Terry Collins, I guess, as I keep speaking of him, it seems like he makes sense to me more and more. And he managed the Astros, by the way, and then the Angels, then the Mets from 2011 to this past season. Not the best year for the Metropolitans in 2017. We know that much. And Collins came under fire, but it was more about really how the roster was structured there with the Mets. I don't know if it was entirely upon Collins' shoulders for why they struggled so mightily. And they had injuries, so how much can you really blame Collins for the season and the poor season that the Mets recently had? I don't know how much you can. And I think he is truly a candidate, and at least a guy that should be considered and should receive an interview for the job if he hasn't already.
All right, Vito, let's take our first time out, come back in the second half of the podcast. I want to get a couple lessons that you learned from the 2017 Tigers season and your thoughts on the playoffs, because they've been quite interesting. A lot of talk regarding the managerial decisions in the AL, and a couple teams have already advanced, so stay with us.
And Doc, the Detroit Sports Commission is one of our fine sponsors and has been now for a while. And guess what? Since '01, the Detroit Sports Commission has applied its expert touch to marketing and to selling the Metro Detroit area as a marquee destination for regional, national, and international amateur sporting events. And through the Detroit Sports Commission's help, these events have attracted thousands of visitors and pumped millions of dollars into our local economy. It is why Detroit is now not only the place where champions are made, but also the place where championships are played. To find out more about the Detroit Sports Commission and all of the events they are bringing to our very region, Doc, follow the DSC on Twitter and on Instagram at DET Sports, and make sure to check out their fine website at DetroitSports.org. And back here on Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company, talking a little bit of postseason action now. And on Monday, we saw the D-backs go by the wayside. We also saw the Red Sox go by the wayside. For a second straight ALDS, the Red Sox were ousted, and very unceremoniously.
Many people are going to pinpoint the Houston Astros in terms of their celebration. Did you see that fella, dancing with his shirt off in the American, briefs there?
I did at the end, disrespecting the flag. Was that the case? I don't know. I think it was just funny, wasn't it?
I thought it was funny.
Yeah.
Many people are also here in Detroit rooting for Justin Verlander. Obviously, Justin Verlander having success with Houston, and he did his part in terms of helping the team advance. And it'd be interesting to see. I kind of want, in terms of Game 5, I want to see Houston versus the Cleveland Indians, obviously. But Game 5, I feel like on Wednesday, that contest is going to be very fascinating to see who pulls it out. Cleveland wins the first 2 games, the New York Yankees rally, and they win the next 2. And now you got Game 5 in Cleveland. Obviously, one of the talking points was Terry Francona using Bauer in Game 1, Joe Girardi, and not challenging that Grand Slam. You got situations where you got both managers kind of on the hot seat. I'm curious, who do you think has the edge Game 5?
Kluber's on the mound. The Kluber is due to rebound after a poor game 2. He got rocked out of nowhere. Had a great ERA against the Yankees prior to game 2. Luckily, Bauer got it done. And luckily, they still won game 2 because actually, they had to come from behind to win that game 2 in Cleveland. They've dropped 2 now on the road in the Bronx at Yankee Stadium, where the atmosphere has been vibrant and loud and proud, and unlike it has been in recent memory at that new Yankee Stadium. But now, when you go back to Cleveland for Game 5, Wednesday, on the day of this podcast coming out, I think you have to favor Kluber over Sabathia. So I'm taking Corey Kluber and the Indians in Game 5, getting to the ALCS to play Justin Verlander and the Houston Astros. And a quick note about Verlander, came out of the pen for the first time ever in his big league career on Monday, by the way. Didn't look too solid and didn't perform so solid either. Let up a 2-run bomb. Astros still won the game, though, and that was great to see them getting that series done against the Boston Red Sox, who once again losing in the first round 2 straight postseasons, and I love seeing that as a Tigers guy.
And I seen on your Twitter page at Vito Jerome that you also commented on the Nationals-Cubs series. You had kind of felt like, look, Max Scherzer, unfortunately, had a quality start, but they pull him, doesn't get the victory, and the Nationals lose the game. And it's a tough situation now. The Nationals got their backs against the wall.
They do, down 2-1 against the Cubbies on the day of this recording, Tuesday of this week. And Scherzer pitches a high-quality outing, has a no-hitter deep into the game, and then gives up a hit. They pull him, and guess what? The Nationals blow the game. And they are like the biggest choke artists in today's game of a playoff team alive still. And they might not be alive for very much longer here because of the fact that the Cubs do have them on the ropes, up 2-1. And Dusty Baker maybe pulled Max Scherzer a little bit too early. And Scherzer, you have to feel bad for the guy. And he has to be feeling like, man, I went from the Tigers, who didn't know how to hold a lead, to the Nationals, who can't hold a lead, and who choke in the postseason, just like my former team did in Motown.
So where do you see that series going? You think that Chicago has the edge and they're going to close it out?
I think the Cubs pulled it out now, honestly, even though the Nats are the better team going into the postseason, more talent, better regular season. But guess what? It doesn't matter how much talent you have in that lineup, how much talent it has, it really hasn't performed up to standards, especially in Game 3. It's the reason why the Cubs won on a blooper from Anthony Rizzo. What a weak hit and a way to win it for the Cubs and to lose it for the Nationals on the road in Chicago. And guess what? Michael Taylor there in the outfield, they should have had that ball. The ball was blooped by Anthony Rizzo. Nobody got to it, and they should have had that. Those are major leaguers. Like 3 major leaguers swarmed around that baseball that dropped in between them. You can't let that happen in a vital playoff game, in any playoff game. And the Nats let it happen, and guess what? They're on the ropes now, and I see them being eliminated in this first round and underachieving for yet another postseason, Doc.
Okay, so in the American League, should it be Houston versus Cleveland? Who has the edge in your mind?
I think Cleveland, I picked them to start the year to beat the Cubs in the World Series. And since I have the Indians against the Dodgers now in the NLCS, I'm going to stick with that pick, as I think I should, right? I'm a man of my words. I'm going to stick with that prediction I made, Indians-Dodgers, and I still see the Indians coming out on top in the Fall Classic.
And switching to the National League, do you think that it's just going to be whoever is going to be lined up to get defeated by the Dodgers?
I just think this, though. If the Cubs get there, the Cubs have a better shot, I think, at this point than the Nationals to defeat the Dodgers. And it would be an upset of sorts, right? I mean, a little bit at least of an upset. And I think, honestly, if the Cubs get there to the NLCS, all bets are off because the Cubs were there last year, and I think they're playing hot. You can say that. They're playing hot at the right time, and that's why the Dodgers, who have been prone to the upset in the past and lost to the Cubs last year in the NLCS, could very well lose to the Cubbies again in the NLCS.
Can you name a player that's kind of outshined anybody else? Any players that have specifically individually done some things that made you go, wow, this is a key component to a squad?
Jose Altuve of the Astros. How about the big game he had in
3 home runs
in Game 1? Very good job by him. A very hard time that the Bo Sox had in getting him out all throughout that ALDS. They really couldn't get him out, and he is superb at second base, a great average hitter, great extra base hitter as well that he has become, hitting for power this season even more than ever before. Great with the glove at second base. He got it done all throughout that first round, Doc. Was a key component in getting them past the Bo Sox. And guess what? That team is loaded with sluggers. Carlos Correa as well had a great game too. He can field and hit the heck out of the ball. George Springer can hit the heck out of the ball. Josh Reddick can hit the heck out of the ball. So many of those guys can hit the heck out of the ball. I keep saying that phrase, but really the Astros have that kind of lineup 1 through 9, and they will be a very scary opponent for whoever they face in the next round. And if they face the Bronx Bombers, if the Bombers, upset the Indians, that is, and get to the LCS, I'm taking the Astros big time.
Needless to say, watching the playoffs now as they advance is going to be really imperative. It's going to be fun to watch. I'm definitely going to start tuning in.
Well, everybody left is good and so talented, from hitters to pitchers, Doc. And that's what you can say when you get to the ALCS and NLCS rounds. And I think we might get the matchups that we really desire and maybe didn't totally see in terms of the Cubs maybe getting there, but still a matchup we desire in the Cubs against the Dodgers and a matchup we truly desire in the AL in the Indians, in my opinion, facing off with the Astros.
All right, to end the podcast, 2017 season, obviously a big disappointment for the Detroit Tigers. I'm reading here on the Detroit News, ratings were massively down for Fox Sports Detroit. It's a situation where they tried as much as they could to, kind of do a little bit what we do, kind of have a little bit of bits here and there and try and divert attention away. But obviously, having Johnny King go all over the country and eat food really wasn't a ratings bonanza. Obviously, it just wasn't because of the fact the play was so atrocious. Many of the fans wanted Brad Ausmus gone probably at the midway point of the season or the All-Star break. And so many people now are wondering, okay, what do we take away from the 2017 season for the Detroit Tigers? 2 or 3 things. What did Vito Chirco learn this year?
Johnny Cain's great bits were outstanding. Yeah, those weren't going to bring the eyeballs in. So they didn't deliver the ratings, and the team was so porous all year long. But guess what? They got the number 1 pick out of it, so I learned that, and that's a vital thing that the Tigers got out of such a lackluster campaign as a whole. Also, that Brad Ausmus is gone, finally, very happy and elated about that. I'll say that much, Doc. And also, Nick Castellanos kind of came on and broke out, you could say, towards the end of the season, and now is that bona fide slugger for the middle of the Tigers' order going into next season, Doc.
Who was the team MVP?
Maybe Castellanos. Fulmer was pitching like it, and then he got hurt, so I don't think you can give it to him. Shane Green was very good all year long. Wilson was good before he was traded. Avila was good before he was traded. Verlander really good before he was traded. I think you have to give it to Nick Castellanos. What do you think, Doc?
I would tend to agree. I feel like offensively, he's come around. Earlier in the year, he just kept saying, look, I'm hitting the ball hard. I'm just not getting any luck. Then when he turned it around, some people, though, who are critiquing Nick Castellanos are saying, look, I mean, it's kind of empty numbers in that you played this way during a season where the team lost a bunch of games. There were key situations where Nick failed to deliver, and then obviously you have to look at the other side of his play, which is the defense. In essence, he got fired from his position.
Yeah.
Third base was an abysmal failure. He's now been moved to the outfield, which I think if you read between the tea leaves is going to be his position. He said, look, I can have more fun. I'm looser. I can kind of do more things. At third base, there's inherently this pressure to perform, and he just didn't have it at third base. And he's openly and honestly admitting it that I just wasn't good enough at that spot to really make a contribution defensively. So they moved him to the outfield, and going forward, we have to kind of see how that is going to shake out. And then obviously what else I learned is that Miguel Cabrera, if dude can't get it right in 2018, there's going to be really no reason to watch the Tigers other than maybe to see Michael Fulmer. Miguel Cabrera, injury-plagued season. Many will argue that playing in the World Baseball Classic was pretty stupid, and it hurt the Detroit Tigers as the season progressed. Now a bunch of questions are going to be asked going forward, and we'll tackle it as the offseason continues and rolls along, but we have to look at it seriously. If Miguel Cabrera is going to be on this roster and he's not going to be healthy, then you realize that's a huge hole on the offense. That's a position where Miguel Cabrera, obviously the most dominant offensive force in the entire Major League Baseball, not going to be there. So if he's not going to be productive, if he's going to continue to have injury-plagued seasons, we got a huge problem because 5 more years after next year.
And then if he doesn't perform next year, even more of the production falls upon the shoulders of Nick Castellanos. Jeimer Candelario, how about a shout-out for him, what he did with the Tigers. Once he gained that third base position, which is his to lose now going into spring and should be his to lose. And I think he's a vital member of that team for 2018 and beyond now, Doc. And also Mikey Matuk, how about a shout-out for him? A guy that could have been their offensive MVP as well down the stretch, as he looked like at times, towards the end of the season, Doc, the best Tigers hitter.
Biggest disappointment this year for you?
Well, Miguel Cabrera. I think you nailed it on the head because of the injuries and the lack of production from him in the middle of the Tigers' order all season long.
Finally, Al Avila. What grade do you give him? Because of the fact that he's in charge of this team, obviously he's the general manager. What formulations do you have? How do you fairly evaluate his job? I mean, I feel like you get a huge demerit when you're hired for a job. You get a chance to survey the landscape. And I understand that the owner has a say, but if you're a general manager and you don't have the right to come in and say, I don't want this guy, I mean, I feel like there were a couple of wasted seasons with Brad Ausmus under the tutelage of Al Avila. I feel like he should have came in, and your first decision, similar to Bob Quinn and Jim Caldwell, I feel like your first decision is, look, I want my own guy. And Al Avila now, this is the hire. I don't think he's going to get a chance to make another one. So how do you fairly evaluate him in what you've seen in terms of his tenure as the general manager of the Tigers?
You're right. He better get this hire right. He didn't hire Brad Ausmus, but he kept him way too long, and that's on Avila, definitely. I would give him for this past season a B-, let's say. Overall wise, since he's been the general manager of the Detroit Tigers, I would say a C+. Do you think that's fair, Doc?
Overall, I feel like that's very fair. I would basically grade him a little bit harder, maybe C-, in that there were some contracts given out that you get huge red flags for. Mike Pelfrey's extra year. You got to remember, too, if I'm the owner of the Tigers, I'm Chris Ilitch, I'm looking at what came in, obviously, but I'm also looking at, damn, we're still paying on Prince Fielder. Damn, we're still paying on these other guys. Look how much money they're going to be paying for Justin Verlander. They paid Mike Pelfrey to go away. They're going to pay Anibal Sanchez $5 million to go away. They're going to pay $18 million for Victor Martinez next year. I'm like, cut the spending, cut. So, unfortunately, when the team is not performing well, you don't get the playoff gates, and the attendance dropped, ratings dropped. It's a tough situation business-wise. So that's on Avila too, as well as Chris Ilitch. I'm hoping that with a new salary budget and with how much they're going to allocate towards funds for the players, that it's in line with what can help the Tigers out as well. And then hopefully you get a competitive ball club next year that at least performs day in and day out, gives effort. And September was a terrible month. It was a grind, and it wasn't even fun really to talk about. But here we are. Rebuild is beginning, and the first piece will come when the manager's hired, and then we'll go from there, seeing how the new look 2018 Tigers are going to look.
The bottom line is that the Tigers weren't a money-making franchise in 2017, or really in recent memory before 2017 too, right, Doc? And the bottom line also is that you have to make money. You have to be a revenue-producing franchise to, well, I guess, keep going with the same format and organization as you have it structured. And that's why the Tigers made so many moves and have really almost now completed a complete roster overhaul. And it finally came to be this season. And now you'll see some more chips, I think, move in terms of guys being dealt and the team even getting younger and cheaper as we go into 2018, Doc.
Always enjoy our baseball chat. Look forward to next week as we look into further what's going on with the Tigers. Maybe look deeper in terms of some players that had some success in the minors, and looking to evaluate others like Jimmer Candelario, looking at Jose Iglesias, looking at Miguel Cabrera, Castellanos further, and really enjoying conversating about baseball, sir. And then, obviously, as the playoffs dig deeper, it's going to be fun to chat about.
Absolutely. And thanks to you, Doc. Thanks to everybody for tuning in to each and every single episode of Tigers Talk 2. And we'll talk to you again next Wednesday for another fresh edition. See you then.